So how can you identify light crude oil and heavy crude oil? Today, after this video, you understand how you can identify crude oil and light, how you can identify heavy crude oil and light crude oil. Remember, in the refinery, the component of heavy crude oil is bitumen, and they also have asphalt. So a component of light crude oil is gasoline, we have naphtha, we have kerosene, and so on and so forth. So remember that we have much component in light crude oil than heavy crude oil. So in a refinery, they are much interested in when the crude oil is light. So how can you identify it? If a crude oil is light or if a crude oil is heavy. Now, first parameter you will use to identify it is called specific gravity. What is specific gravity? In aspect of crude oil, specific gravity is the ratio of the density of crude oil. Is the ratio of the density of crude oil. Take note of this: density of crude oil to the density of water at the same reference temperature. Take note of that, at the same reference temperature. So as you can see in the formula, specific gravity, the density of water, density of oil, to the density of water. Now, what is the unit of specific gravity? Usually, you know that density is mass over volume. Now, if you do the calculation, you see it that is gram per meter cube. Gram per meter cube, or is kilogram, or you can say it's kilogram per centimeter cube. Kilogram per centimeter cube. Take note of that. Now, do you know how can you use specific gravity to identify if a crude oil is light or if a crude oil is heavy? Now, if you can see this diagram, you see this crude oil sample. You can see the crude oil is at the top, floating at the top, while the water is at the bottom. So what can we say about this sample? Is the crude oil is lighter than the water. The crude oil is lighter than the water, so the water will settle down while the crude oil will float at the top. In other words, the water is heavier than the crude oil. So that is the specific gravity, is the ratio of density of crude oil. So you are saying the difference between the crude oil and the ratio between the crude oil and the water. So tell us the difference between the crude oil and the water, the ratio between it. So let's throw more light on this. Now, the specific gravity tell us whether the crude is lighter or heavier than water. I'll come again. Specific gravity tell us whether the crude is lighter or heavier than water. If the specific gravity is less than 1, oil will float on water. In the previous video, you see that the oil will float on water. That means the specific gravity is less than 1. If the specific gravity is the same, is equal to 1, it just equals to 1, that means it's the same as water. If the specific gravity is greater than 1, that means the oil will sink in water, which is not common. As you can see, the most common sample we can have in crude oil is the oil usually floats on water. The oil usually floats on water. That means the specific gravity is less than 1. But if the specific gravity is greater than 1, the crude oil will sink in water. So let's throw more light on this. Now, there's another parameter we can use to identify if a crude oil is lighter or heavier. This parameter is API. API is called American Petroleum Institute. So before I come to API, let me come to this specific gravity. Now you can see, like I said, the specific gravity is always less than 1 for light crude oil. It's less than 1. And you can see the specific gravity scale here. If is 0.95, 0.9 is heavy, 0.8 is heavy. So as the arrow is coming down, the crude oil will be light. As it's decreasing, the crude oil will be light. But if the number is high, the more it's higher, the more it's greater, the crude oil will be heavy. So for you to identify a heavy crude oil using specific gravity, the crude oil, the crude oil must be, sorry, let me come again. The crude oil, for you to identify a heavy crude oil or light crude oil, the crude oil, where crude oil is 0.9, for example 0.95, the crude oil is heavy. The crude oil is heavy. But as it's going down, our normal light crude oil 0.8, crude oil is light. We have 0.8, 0.85, the crude oil is light. So the API gravity explain converting specific gravity for easier crude oil specification. Now the petroleum industry found that specific gravity value such as 0.82 or 0.82, which is light crude oil, or 0.91, which is heavy crude oil, were not always intuitive for comparing crude oil. That means it's not always, let me put it the word, it's not always easy for comparing crude oil. They were looking for the most easiest ways to compare, to know if a crude oil is heavy or light. Now the meaning is that specific gravity closer to 1, like 0.9, indicates a heavier oil. Like I said, indicates a heavier oil closer to the density of water, while a lower value like 0.8, 0.82 or 0.8, like the scale here, indicates a lighter oil, which is counterintuitive and can be confusing to remember. So for the oil industry now look at it, for them to explain it, for us to identify a light crude oil or a heavy crude oil, most in a simple ways, you have to use API gravity, API, which is called American Petroleum Institute. So American Petroleum Institute now find a way to identify a specific gravity, to identify a heavy crude oil or a light crude oil. So the API, to simplify classification, the American Petroleum Institute developed API gravity. Now what does API gravity did? The API gravity converts specific gravity into a scale where higher number indicates lighter oils. Now remember, higher number in specific gravity indicates heavy oil, but in API gravity scale, the heavier number indicates lighter oil. So it's inverse. You can say it's inverse. So the heavier oil, the larger number in specific gravity is indicating heavy oil. While in API, if the scale is higher, like 40, like 50, it indicates light oil. But if the scale is going down, is lower, like 20, 10, it indicates heavier oil. So that is the difference between API gravity and the specific API gravity and the specific gravity. So you can see the formula of API gravity. The formula is API is equals to 141.5 all over specific gravity. The temperature is always as 60 degree Fahrenheit minus 131.5. So according to this temperature, but the API standard temperature that is usually used is 15 degrees Celsius. Is 15 degrees Celsius. That is the temperature that is usually used. So if I give you another temperature, you have to convert to that temperature, to the standard temperature. So let's look at the classification of crude oil by API gravity. So the classification of crude oil by API gravity. Now if like I said before, if the API is greater than 31.1 is light crude oil. Greater than 31.1 is light crude oil. If it's 22.3 to 31.1 is medium crude oil. If it is 10 to 32.3 is heavy crude oil. It's heavy crude oil. So if it's less, if the number is less according to API gravity, is heavy crude oil. If it's less than 10, it's extra heavy. It's extra heavy crude oil. So remember, like I said before, in our refinery, we are much interested that our crude oil to be light. So that is why you have to, it's very important to identify if your crude oil is light or heavy. So thank you for watching. Please subscribe to Petrochemical Diary to have more engineering content like this.